welcome. So I need your help with this first part, all right? We're just going to snap together. But pay attention to my rhythm. Keep going. A little faster. Still a little faster. So early in the morning, Jesus came to the temple. All the people came to him and sat down, and Jesus taught them. Jesus was a teacher. He was a rabbi. So what happens is Jesus is going, and he's interrupted. A group of people, the New Testament called scribes and Pharisees, found a woman who was in the act of adultery, grabbed her before she could finish, and threw her down in front of Jesus and said, Jewish tradition, the law of Moses, says that we should stone this woman because adultery is a sin. So tradition says to stone her. What do you say? They want to know. Tradition says kill her. She sinned. God says kill her. What do you say? So what did Jesus say? Does anybody know? It's a trick question. He didn't say anything. He just sort of bent down. He took his finger, bent down on the ground, and started to The New Testament says he wrote on the ground. But what did he write? We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. Tradition hasn't preserved his writing, and actually, it's debatable whether Jesus could write in the first place. He probably could not write. Maybe he could read a little bit of the Bible. So maybe he didn't write words or letters on the ground. Maybe he drew a cartoon, or maybe he doodled. That's what I think he did. Or maybe he just sort of bent down and ran his fingers through the dust like it was his own personal Zen garden. But whatever he did in the dust on the ground was enough to save the woman's life. Whenever the woman's accusers saw this dust creation, the Bible says they went away one by one, until only Jesus and the woman were left. And at that point, Jesus asks the woman, hey, where are your accusers? And she says, well, they're not here. Nobody's here to condemn me but you. And Jesus says, actually, I don't condemn you either. Go and sin no more. So Jesus isn't giving this woman a command. He's just reminding her of her freedom. Father Jim Keenan, a Catholic ethicist at Boston College, and his mentor, says sin is the failure to bother to love. So when Jesus sends this woman away from sin, he's actually sending her in the direction of love. He's telling her, love is that way. Go there. But that's nice, but I'm actually not interested in his words. I'm interested in his doodling, or as I'm calling it, his dancing. So it's Jesus' movement that saves this woman's life. It's his movement that throws the accusers off their game. It's his movement that sends the crowds away. Jesus intervenes with his body. He bends down and he doodles and he dances. That's the focus of the story. So in other words, the focus of the story is not on the words that Jesus says, but the word that Jesus is, right? The Gospel of John says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So the focus is on Jesus, on his body, on his movement, on his style. The Bible uses the term kingdom of God to name God's future, the future that God, in God's time, is going to bring about. Now, this future is not a different world. It's this world, but it's this world worlding in that way. When we hope for the kingdom, we don't hope for a different world, but for a different worlding of this world, a different dance. There's an early Christian theologian named Origen who calls Jesus the autobasileia. It's a Greek term, and it means the self-kingdom, or the kingdom itself, the one who kingdoms, right? So if the kingdom is God's future, then Jesus is really God's future, right? Jesus is the self-future of God. So if we want to know what God's future looks like, well, then we need to pay attention to Jesus. Jesus is the one who shows the world how to world in new ways, in ways that correspond to God's future. So, it's the style of Jesus that makes an impression on those who remembered him. They might not have remembered exactly what he said, but they remembered how he typically said the things that he said. They remembered the qualities that set him apart. They remembered what made him memorable in the first place. Think about somebody in your life who's made an impression on you. Somebody that you really, really remember. You probably don't remember a lot of what they said, right? What you remember is the way that they caressed your face, the way that they held your hand, the way that they gently bopped you on their knee, right? Maybe a grandparent. You remember how they chased you around the house, how they gave you piggyback rides, right? You remembered your embodied interactions with them. You remember that person's style. And it's the same thing with Jesus. When the people who remembered him, they would think, when Jesus was confronted in this sort of situation, this is the way that he would typically respond. He would tell this sort of pun, he would tell this sort of short story, or he might do this sort of dance. So our goal as Christians, if we're Christians, and I am, our goal then isn't to find the authentic Jesus, but to attend to his style, to watch him dance, to watch him bend down and doodle. We want to hone in on his movements, on his fingers, on the space his body occupies and reappropriates and decorates. We want to focus on his doodling, not to make sense of it, but to study the doodler. What we want to do is to get his doodling into our fingers, to get his style into our body, to get his tap dance into our feet. It's tricky though, because there's an unpredictability to Jesus that makes it difficult to say in advance how he's going to behave. Is he going to heal somebody on the Sabbath? Will he respond with patience to a scribe? Will he have mercy on a Samaritan? Will he allow women to wash his feet in polite company? Of course, we know how he will behave in these situations because we are familiar with the stories the way that they've been told. But there was a time when the people around him didn't actually know what Jesus was going to do. There's a playful spontaneity to Jesus. He's genuinely open to being surprised. He's genuinely open to the future. So that is one of the first qualities of Jesus' style, is openness to surprise. When men bring an adulterer before Jesus and demand that he give them an answer, Jesus doesn't play along. He's not primarily responding to his questioners or even to the woman whose life he's trying to save. He's responding to God and God's future. And this future, Jesus believes, is actually more real than the present. The future, in fact, determines the shape of the present. So Jesus gets quiet, listens for the future, and tries to bring the present into correspondence to it. Before he says a word, he disrupts the rhythm of the scene. He was being asked to join a quick step, but he slowed down and instead decided to dance a Viennese waltz. Jesus' body and actions are surprisingly out of place in this moment. And that's because they belong to a different place. They belong to God's future. There's something else we note about Jesus' style. Jesus has incredible control over his body at all times. He knows exactly where his body is in space. When the scribes and Pharisees bring the woman before Jesus, he's sitting down. And then after they ask him their questions, or really demand an answer, Jesus bends down to doodle. I think the narrator wants us to pay attention to Jesus' bodily location. Jesus' interactions with those around him are embodied. He has skin in the game, literally. He responds with his whole person to those in need. He bends down, sits with them, breaks bread with them, touches their broken limbs, caresses their blind eyes. And the very fact that he brought himself low to the ground with this adulterous woman demonstrates that he's willing to be vulnerable. Because if somebody's on the ground and everybody's about to throw stones at her, then the ground is the last place you want to be, right? But by occupying the ground, this space of almost violence, Jesus physically inserts himself into the space between victim and oppressor, and as he does, he creates a new third space and invites both parties to join him. So what else can we discern about Jesus' style? Well, he's willing to hold together tensions, right? He's in this space. He's not leaving. He's being present to the accusers and the accused, to the oppressors and the victims. He's not really taking a side. He's there, present for anybody who wants to join him. What else? So, by touching the ground, actually, Jesus reminds us that all of our actions are connected with the land. That we're always entangled with the earth. That whatever we do, the land will suffer, or the land will be comforted. There's just no escaping our entanglement with the land. The woman was forcefully brought to Jesus, but Jesus actually doesn't seize her or force her to go anywhere. He simply invites her to go. right? But he leaves the choice up to her. So another characteristic of Jesus' style is that he respects people's right to determine their own futures. He respects people's right to self-determination. I like that parallel. I did it in a show once, and it was super fast, and that one stuck with me. Now, of course, even though, and this is key, somebody's about to be killed, Jesus is committed to nonviolence. And I think that's key, right? It's not that Jesus is nonviolent when he wants, when his life is threatened, but actually he responds nonviolently when somebody else's life is threatened. He's just perfectly committed to nonviolence. So, and we learn all of this about Jesus' style just by watching his body before he opens his mouth. Now, we don't know exactly what Jesus is going to doodle ahead of time, but we know that Jesus doodles in the style of Jesus. The Gospels depict him meeting many different people in many different places from many different walks of life. He tells stories, he plays with kids, he teases his disciples, he goes fishing, he takes naps in boats in the middle of a storm. But no matter what he's doing, there's a stylistic coherence there. When we see Jesus act, we go, yep, that's him. That's Gregory Hines' time step. You guys know Gregory Hines? Master tapper. So what does Jesus want us to do? Well, he tells us. He wants us to follow him, to join his dance, to keep it going, but that's tricky. Because Jesus didn't write us a book to read. He didn't write the Gospels. He didn't write the New Testament. He doodled on a ground that we can't access, and even if we could, the jottings would have long ago disappeared. So if we're going to follow Jesus, if we're going to style our style after his style, then we're going to have to improvise. So Christian ethics are all about studying how Jesus doodles and then imagining how we might keep his doodling going. Christian ethics are all about improvising in the style of Jesus, who was an expert at improvisation. Why did he doodle in the first place? When a woman was brought to him and her life was threatened, why did Jesus bend down to doodle? Well, he was probably figuring out what to do. He was vamping and buying time, and he was doing a little shim-sham. Right? A shim-sham is a soft shoe routine. Tappers will do it without taps on their feet, and they will bring out sand, and they'll sort of sprinkle it on the ground, and then they'll... So my job as a Christian is to watch Jesus do his little dance and to keep it going, to go and do likewise. That's a New Testament saying. Sometimes Jesus will tell a parable, and there will be an exemplary character in the parable, like the Good Samaritan, and then Jesus will say, go and do likewise, right? Keep this story going in your story. Go and do likewise means listen for the rhythm that Jesus established and play into it. We aren't making a new dance. We're actually dancing the same dance. We're dancing to the same rhythm. We're just expanding it. We're just stretching it in new directions. So if we're doing our job right, then the audience will see our tap dance and be reminded of Jesus. We'll be improvising a variation on a theme. And the audience will know that the theme is Jesus. Now, improv doesn't just mean go ahead and wing it, right? It doesn't mean that we're not prepared. And going off book and riffing on the spot requires a tremendous amount of training. To be able to successfully improvise in a rehearsal studio or a performance venue, I have to be able to do a few things at once. First, I have to have spent time learning tap dance, which means studying different forms of dance with different teachers, each with their own distinct style. So the goal is to be familiar with as many different styles as possible so that I'm then capable of responding to whatever musical call is offered to me. So I like MGM tap. Have you ever seen like an MGM musical like Singing in the Rain or Anything Goes or Dames at Sea? These are old musicals that Hollywood put out in like the late 30s, early 40s. That's my kind of dance, right? So there's a dance that I like by this dancer named Danny Kaye, and it goes. I like that sort of dance, right? Or Moses supposes from Singing in the Rain. It's hard to do it on this little dot. I'm used to dancing on a stage and you move a lot. Or 42nd Street. I love 42nd Street. We do a lot of Actually, 42nd Street starts with the curtain down and then the curtain just rises up. And you see like a 32 dancers. You just see their feet doing this kind of stuff. It's called a time step because it keeps the time. But I've done some other tap too. That's called like Broadway tap or show tap, theater tap. I've done some rhythm tap. It's not what I'm trained in, but when you are hired to do a job, you have to do the job. So I worked with this guy named Mike Minery, and there were some moves like that one is hard because he would usually shuffle with your toe, but he had us shuffling with our heel. It's just called a scuffle. Done some Irish dance. I don't love Irish dance because I don't like saying that still. You've seen how I talk, so I don't like to dance like this. So when I improv, I don't start from scratch. I start with what I know, right? I start with the kind of dancer I am. I start with the kind of dancer that I've been formed to be. So when an opportunity for improv presents itself, I start with what I know. Right? And that's also what I do as a Christian. As a Christian, when I'm given an opportunity to act, I start with what I know. I start with Jesus. This is what Jesus did in the story that we looked at. He started with Genesis. God is the creator. God is the God of life, the God of love. Humans, he reminded himself, don't get to decide who lives and who dies. That's God's job. Jesus started with scriptures, right? What scriptures did Jesus have, by the way? He didn't have the New Testament, right? So he had the Jewish scriptures, he had the Torah, he had the Psalms, and these scriptures formed him. So by the time that Jesus bends down to doodle, all of this stuff had already formed his fingers in a certain kind of way, right? Just like my feet have been formed by my teachers, by watching these MGM musicals, by being in shows, Jesus' imagination has been formed in a certain kind of way, right? And so as Christians, to be able to act ethically in the style of Jesus, we also need to form ourselves in a similar way. We could also add another brush in there. I like taking a step and then just seeing how many sounds you can put in there. So Jesus was an expert at responding to the rhythm of what was happening around him. Sometimes he'd join the urgent rhythm of a scene, or sometimes he'd slow it down, or sometimes he'd take it in a new direction. But he had an ear for rhythm. Now, psychologists tell us that actually we can influence the rhythm of people around us, right? So if you're ever with a friend or roommate who's in a heightened state of stress or aggression, you can actually, just with your body, slow them down by exaggerating your breathing, right? You can do that. Psychologists have a lot of data on this, right? So we can just sort of change the rhythm of those around us, the rhythm of a scene, without really saying anything. If I'm going to be good at improv, then I need to know the basics. I need to have a vocabulary of dance steps at my disposal to call on at a moment's notice, okay? So all tap, I mean, there's only a few basic steps, right? So this is your toe, this is your heel. You can step, you can stamp, you can stomp, you can brush forward with your toe, and if you brush forward and backward, that's a shuffle. You can shuffle in front, you can shuffle back, which I suck at, but you can take the shuffle everywhere. Let's see, so if we want to go toe, toe, heel, we can put it together, and it's called a cramp roll. Or we can take, instead of a brush forward and back, we can just brush back, either together or separately. I love those. Those are pullbacks. So these are like the basic building blocks of tap. And I can't improvise unless I've mastered them, right? To an extent. So Jesus' ethic, Jesus' style is also made up of building blocks, right? Compassion, love for God, love for neighbor, a passion for God's future, a desire to bring everyone into that future, servanthood, lightheartedness, and finally, an unwavering trust in God. In each new situation Jesus encounters, he'll put these building blocks together in a new way, but these same building blocks will always be present. Now, here's something to know about improvisers. We aren't free to do anything that we want. We have responsibilities. We are under obligations to everyone on stage with us, to our audience, our fellow performers, our choreographers, to the technical crew. I'm also under an obligation to the performers who have come before me, whose work I've studied, and whose work I am bearing forward. I'm also under an obligation to do them justice, so to speak, particularly if I'm doing one of their famous steps. Like one of my teachers in New York, Ray Hesling, he has this step, and I'm going to do it in a performance. I really have to work on that to do him justice, right? And it's tough, and I'll screw it up, but it's something like, it's really hard. It's pick up with a heel and a dig, and it's tough. But if everybody knows that step is from that guy. So if you're going to do it, then you really need to make sure you can do it. Improv is an experiment with possibilities. But the thing about these possibilities is that they're already actually present in the rhythm, in the scene, in the music, right? I'm just responding and keeping it going. So when we improvise, we're actualizing potential contained in the present. We're calling attention to the fact that reality always contains more than what we notice. And that's Christian ethics in a nutshell, really. You say, hey, there's something more going on here. Take another look. You're leaving something out, or you're leaving someone out. So I have to admit, I've been slightly terrified about improvising for you guys tonight. I'm a music theater dancer, and we don't do a lot of improv. We're performers, and choreographers tell us what to do with our feet, what to do with our hands, where to turn our head. They tell us which number on the stage to stand on. If you look up close at the bottom of the stage, you'll see a bunch of numbers. That's so dancers know where to go. So we don't really make up stuff on the fly. So I was worried that I would come out here and I would miss steps, and I did miss steps, and I missed sounds, and I was kind of doing it on this thing, and I'm not used to that. But that's the thing, there's always a risk that you will fail, and that you're going to get it wrong. Improv is risky business, but so is Christian ethics. There's just no way to ensure that we get it perfectly right, but that's not the goal. The goal is to follow Jesus, to study his doodling, to keep our eye on his style, to listen for his rhythm, and to keep going. So let's try the snap thing again and see if we can improve a little bit. Good job, guys. Thank you. If you have any questions,
Thank you, Brandon. We have plenty of time for questions, comments.
glad to see my students here. Thanks for being here. Anyone? Megan's a tap dancer up there. She was Polly and Crazy for You. Here.
I was going to ask a question unless somebody else knows.
Sure.
You're combining things that seem so separate in the world, right? Like, I've heard you guys finish here, I studied theology, and I've danced my whole life, and those are two different worlds. How, I guess, in your own experience of faith and relationship with God has dance showed up for you? Because clearly it's informing your theology and you're allowing us to make connections that we maybe haven't made in a new way. I'm curious in your life how you found that integration. Has it always been there, or?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. No, it hasn't always been there, and actually, it was very hard for me to come into the academy because I was a professional dancer, and it was really tough to leave that. But what happened was I moved to Delaware, and there's just not a lot of dance work there, so I just said, okay, I'll start grad school, and then I met him, and I guess he tricked me into staying for the Ph.D., and now I'm here. No, I'm really happy that I'm here. But you know what it was, Megan? Megan and I took a class with a woman on campus named Margaret Mel. Do you remember the CCL, what was it? Creativity and Contemplative Life. And I told, this woman, she's a spirituality teacher, I said, I don't like doing theology, I miss dancing. And I said, if I were doing maybe contemporary dance or ballet, I could see how I could bring that into Mass. I could see how I could incorporate that into theology. I said, but I do music theater. I don't know how to bring that into theology. And she said, you're doing it. You're already doing it. Just like who you are a music theater person, right? I'm flamboyant, I'm extra, I'm almost like a caricature of myself, right? That's because I spent all these years doing musical theater. So that just sort of gave me freedom to experiment, right? She also said something like, God wants you to be 100% you when you dance and 100% you when you do theology, right? But if I'm being 100% me here and I'm being 100% me here, that means I'm being the same person in both places, right? Because both of those places are the full me. So it was really just kind of being aware that I was doing it and then giving myself permission to do it. But you're right, there's not a lot of people who are bringing music theater into Christian theology. And in fact, how many years have I been asking you to let me do something like this, to tap and talk about Jesus? And he's always like, no, why don't you do the talk on Jesus and social media? So I always do that. So it is tough, to theorize it explicitly. But we should go to the dance studio sometime and tap and then do theology and keep it going, and maybe we could start a club or something.
Yeah, and I just want to comment, just with everybody here, I think that's a great example of we all have these things in our lives that we love that might be separate from faith, whether that's part of your life or not. I think it's an invitation for all of us to consider how all of life shows up in our experience of faith. And God speaks to us through those things.
Yeah. Thanks.
So some kind of question. So I love the fact that you brought up the riskiness of Christianity, especially at the end of your talk, right? So when I think about Jesus, Jesus is he's kind of a force of nature, but he's always out moving about doing things, right? And when he's out and about doing things, right, he risks all these interactions that can potentially explode, get derailed, and go very wrong, right? But he still goes out, right? And so what I think, what I would really like to impress upon the students here today is that if you're going to be a Christian and you're going to love, right, do it bigly and boldly, right? In order to do that, you have to take risks, right? You have to get out of your routine. You have to step out of your skin every now and then. And I'd like you to offer the students some practical wisdom in terms of the things they can do to be a bit riskier in terms of being more loving and being more compassionate as students at Villanova.
So we're gonna kind of follow Jesus here and just give a story. So like a couple of years ago, I was, hi Mia, I didn't even see you out there. A couple of years ago, I was on the phone with the woman from the phone company because the Verizon wasn't working or something. And you know when you're on the phone with your parents or with your spouse or somebody, your girlfriend, boyfriend, and when you hang up, and what do you usually say right before you hang up? I love you, bye, right? So I'm on the phone and I'm doing a million things and I tell this Verizon woman, thanks, okay, I love you. And she laughed and then she said, thank you. And I hung up the phone and I was mortified. But then I started to think about it and I was like, why is that embarrassing? We have no problem hating people we don't know, right? What is the problem with loving somebody we don't know? But the problem is, we're kind of embarrassed of this word love. I have this editor, and he keeps coming to me and saying, oh, can you write an essay on this, that, and the other thing? I'm like, yeah, let's do it on love. He's like, but that's such a Christian thing, and I don't know if non-Christians are gonna respond to this essay. And I'm like, what happened to our world? Well, it's not the world. I mean, they have no problems loving each other in, Latin America or whatever. But what happened here in America that we're just not okay with telling each other we love each other? So what I would say, a piece of advice, and I saw this on a meme once, and I'm just going to tell you what the meme said. It said something like, normalize telling your friends that you love them. Say it so much that it's weird. So I would just say, really take a risk and you don't have to say it, right? Jesus says things without saying them, right? How can you show people that you love them? It's going to go beyond holding the door open for somebody. One of the women who work in the cafeteria, she's so great, and I've seen her here forever. I've been here since 2016, and I have this beautiful Stanley Cup. It's the flamingo. It's sold out in a minute, but I got one. And this was my first one. And I didn't even know what they were until Hoda was talking about them on the Today Show. And then I ordered this one and I loved it. And then I kept ordering them and now I have 6. And so I brought this with me and I put it down so I could grab my wallet as I was paying. And the woman who worked there was like, oh, I love your Stanley Cup. I want to get one for myself. I was like, well, what color would you get? And she's like, I want yellow or orange. That's all I want. And my kids are making fun of me. And so I was telling my husband about this. I was like, I feel like I should just get her the Stanley Cup. He's like, yeah, you should definitely do that. And I was like, but is that weird? Is that going to be weird? And he's like, why would it be weird? Right? But I think that's our impulse, that it would be weird to do something generous for a stranger that we don't know, right? But I mean, when you turn on the news and you look at sort of what's happening to the country and how sort of bitterly divided we've become, it doesn't seem like giving a stranger a Stanley Cup is going to make things worse, right? To take risks like that, buy somebody a Stanley Cup, and one of the limited edition ones. Oh, I'm not going to give this one to anyone, but I would give them a yellow one.
Thank you.
So, in the spirit of taking risks, how would you, sort of deal with this tension between searching for moral normativity on the one hand, and then improvisation, taking those risks, right, and encountering something that you might end up discovering was wrong? Like, how do you wrestle with that as an ethicist?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what's normative in tap are the building blocks, right? Like flap, shuffle, crimp, roll, pull back. So the building blocks are normative. So I think in Christian ethics then, what are the building blocks, right? It's kind of like neighborly solidarity, right? Being for others, right? It's Bonhoeffer. Love, right? Sacrificial love, maybe. But yeah, you can get it wrong. There's this story, I'm going to tell you all this story actually. I love this story. It's my favorite one in the New Testament. And it shows Jesus, actually being really immoral and getting it wrong, right? Because there's a risk that we get it wrong and Jesus gets it wrong. So I'm going to tell you this story. So a woman comes to Jesus, and this probably happened early in his ministry. And by the way, historians, even like historians who are not Christian, believe that this story that I'm about to tell you really happened because it's so embarrassing to Jesus that Jesus' followers would never create a story like this, right? So we tend to think something like this happened. So a woman comes to Jesus and says, please heal my daughter, right? She's at the brink of death. I need you to step in and heal her. This story gets me, I'm sorry. And Jesus says, I'm not going to do it because she's not a Jew. And that's such a racist, xenophobic thing to say. And Jesus says that. And if the story stopped there, I would not be Christian because that's xenophobic, it's bigoted, right? I'm a gay Catholic. I face enough of this crap, right? I want to be a Christian. But the story doesn't stop there, thank God. This woman takes a risk. She's the one actually who's moral here, not Jesus. And Jesus actually refers to her as a dog. He says, it's not good to take the children's food and throw it to a dog. Meaning the children are Jewish people and the dogs are everyone else, right? So early in Jesus' career, he still has this xenophobia about him. And does anybody know what she says? It's like the most beautiful moment in the New Testament. She says, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And Jesus is like, his mind was blown. And he says, you know what? I'm going to do it. And he did it. So in this example, Jesus was wrong. He failed miserably, right? Totally unethical. But she took a risk. And then what happened is he decided to take a risk. And he opened himself up, right? And as a result of that, then Jesus' ministry expands. And he makes himself present for everyone. Jews, non-Jews, Syrophoenicians, Greeks, Gentiles, everyone, the whole world. And it's because this one woman took a risk and pushed, right? Jesus was saying no to her. That's something we never say in improv, right, Megan? We never, ever, ever say no. If you were doing a scene with somebody in comedy, how many people watch The Office? Okay. Michael Scott likes to do improv, but like he's terrible at it. Well, people hate being in a scene with him because what he ends up doing is he ends up like shooting everybody dead, right? In the scene with him. And then because they have to say yes to that choice he's making, they just sort of fall on the ground and die. And it ends the scene. So they have to say yes. But they could say yes and they could die and then immediately come back alive as a zombie, right? But the point is, in comedy, you never say no, right? And so that was Jesus' mistake. This woman came to him and said, heal my daughter, and he said, no. But the woman said yes. She said yes to Jesus' no, and by doing that, she was actually able to overcome it. So I'm glad you brought that up, Bill, because we do have examples in Scripture of Jesus taking a risk and getting it wrong, but then Jesus taking a risk and getting it right. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Well, super. Thanks so much to Brandon. We appreciate the call.